Hey, how's it? Welcome to the Chaos Effect Mind, or welcome back to the Chaos Effect Mind. My name is Kilo. I will be your hostess as always. Welcome back. I know I took a little hiatus. I got a sinus infection. I got some other stuff going on in my life right now that I just don't even. Anyway, I lost my footing there for a second, and not even lost my footing. I just need to take a step back from just the internet in general, and a lot of things. I'm juggling a lot of balls in the air, and I'm not a juggler. So I do the best I can with what I got. But welcome back. It's always great to have you here. Or welcome. As always, I'm going to start with an affirmation, a little affirmation pule, if you will. Say it in your head or repeat after me, or don't listen at all. I am in control. I am one with God. I'm the only authority in my life. I am divinely protected by the light of my being. I close off my aura and body of light to the lower astral levels of mind, and I now open to the spiritual world. Thank you, God, and so it is. Amine. I also got an affirmation card here because I know I had stopped doing that for a little bit. But this affirmation card says new bonds. And the affirmation is healthy relationships are forthcoming in my near future. When I least expect it, I will welcome new flourishing people into my life. I manifest positive meetings, conversations, and introductions, and relinquish this control to the universe. Amine. Okay, so today's episode will mainly be based off of shrinking the outer critic, and it'll kind of play off of the last episode that I had. So if you have not listened to that, go back and listen. I believe it was the 14 stages of the inner critic, something like that. But yeah, it's the last episode that I released back in March. I know, guys. It's May. Okay, the outer critic has a lot to do, of course, with your inner critic and the things we inwardly tell ourselves. With the outer critic has more to do with appearance and people pleasing and standards of everyone else except for us and our inner children and what we expect of us, not just what the world expects of us. Where does the outer critic stem from? I know that I said it stems from your inner critic largely, but where does it stem from there and after? Like where did you get some of these thoughts? Where did you maybe pick up some of these thoughts? This says the inner critic is the part of your mind that views you as flawed and unworthy. The outer critic is the part that views everyone else as flawed and unworthy. When the outer critic is running your mind, people appear to be too awful and too dangerous to trust. So, the outer critic is the counterpart of self-esteem destroying inner critic. It uses the same programs of perfectionism and endangerment against others that your inner critic uses against yourself. Whoa. I find that interesting just because, we tend to pass on our traumas to certain people, to especially parents to children, children to parents. It could happen either way because the children can trigger the parents, and the parents can instill that trauma in the child. So forgiveness and grieving is a large part of all of these things to move on and move forward, and not saying to diminish anything that you've been through, not to diminish anything that you may be currently going through, or what your parents did to you, or how awful it may have been, or how good it was, whichever way it goes. It's not to diminish anything, because your feelings are valid. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean your reactions are valid to whatever is happening. And I feel that those things get misconstrued when it comes to certain points of view or perspectives of other people. And, I feel when someone hears that their emotions are being validated, they also then validate and rationalize their reactions, whether they be poor. They're mostly poor in this scenario that I'm thinking of, but they don't rationalize your behaviors and your reactions and your emotional inability to not control your emotions, but contain your inner emotions, and to thought stop and to think before you speak, right? You know, they love to say you got two ears, so you should listen twice as much as you speak. Yeah. So I don't feel that that is the case, but in a lot of cases, when it comes to older generations, I mean, people in general, honestly, but my experience with older generations, my father in particular, he does not listen to comprehend. He just listens to respond and make sure his response is heard. So he either gets louder, he gets more aggressive in what he's saying, or he speaks over me when I'm trying to say something to him. I'll point these things out to him and just say, hey, like, and again, I'm not, in no way, shape, or form am I saying I'm perfect. There's no way that I'm saying that, because no one's perfect. It's unattainable. So get that out of your head right now. Nobody's perfect. I don't care if you think you are. You ain't. But I'll point these things out to him, and sometimes I'll catch him and he will stop and actually hear what I'm saying. But it's the when you're on your phone and you're scrolling and you're listening but not listening, and then you're also responding but you're not actually hearing what the person is saying. That's comprehension, right? It's just like my students in the pool, right? I'm like, okay, did you hear what I said? They're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, what did I say? Oh, I don't know. Okay, then you didn't listen, nor did you comprehend what I just said. So I digress. The outer critic developed in reaction to parents who were too dangerous to trust. The outer critic helped us to be hyper aware of the subtlest energy that our parents were deteriorating into their most dangerous behaviors. Over time, the outer critic grew to believe that anyone and everyone would be inevitably turn out to be as untrustworthy as our parents. And the thing about the outer critic, it can alienate you from others, because you are so defensive and on offense and just ready to attack others, and it scares people away, and it builds walls and fortresses of isolation around you, so that no one can get in, no one can penetrate those force fields, and no one can get beyond how much you feel you can trust them, or the level you're comfortable of allowing people in to trust them, or being vulnerable is pretty much what I'm getting at. The walls are a laundry list of their exaggerated shortcomings. So your outer critic will be big on pointing out everything that's wrong with the person you're thinking about, or whether it be friend, relationship wise. I'm assuming this can highly affect your love relationships. But and in an awful irony, the critic attempts to protect us from abandonment by scaring us further into it. If we are ever to discover the comfort of soothing connection with others, the critic's dictatorship of the mind must be broken. The outer critic's arsenal of intimacy spoiling dynamics must be consciously identified and gradually deactivated. I'm guilty. I'm definitely guilty of this. I'm sure lots of people are. Yeah, like it's almost easier, right? It's almost easier to not allow other people in. It's almost easier to stay shut down and stay in our comfort zone, and stay away from people in general, and not put ourselves out there, not risk whatever it doesn't. You don't have to be involved with these people in any kind of way. Like, you can see the way they're moving and then go from there. If you don't like the way they're moving, keep it moving. Like, that's just pretty much what it boils down to. But it's easier said than done, because it's a constant repetition of what we've been telling ourselves over and over and over again. I had to stop myself the other day because I was thinking something, and I was just thinking everything that could go wrong. And I stopped and I was like, why couldn't it go right though? Like, in what version of this am I thinking to myself, oh, this can go right, that can go right? I'm thinking of all the beautiful possibilities and the glass half full, rather than thinking of the glass half empty and being like, oh, this is gonna happen, this, when this shit hasn't even happened yet. And, that's a very big flag of our outer critic and our inner critic doing intermingling with one another. Because inside you can tell yourself something, outside it's just it's a poor reflection of one or the other. They don't have good reflections of one another. It becomes easier to stay shut down and stay in our bubble of what we know, because I had someone tell me before, oh, I'm not gonna tell them that. What if they use it against me one day? It's like, one day. What if that day never comes? Like, that's a very far into the future thing to be thinking about, and you're gonna be mad at for someone making fun of you for being vulnerable when they're just mad at themselves because they can't allow themselves to be in that vulnerable state of being. I'll never be upset about that, and I'll never get mad about that. I don't care if you make fun of me for being vulnerable. We're vulnerable as individuals, as people. We're born to be vulnerable. We're born to have emotions. We're born to feel things. That's one of the most beautiful things about being alive. I know, baby. Okay, my bad. I am back. I had to feed my doggy dog. Or I got to feed my doggy dog. She's very grumpy when she doesn't get her way or eat. I want to jump right back into this and go over like 4F types and outer critic and inner critic ratios. So if you don't know, the 4F distortions of attachment and safety instincts obviously are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fight would be control to connect and rage to be safe. Flight, perfect to connect, perfect to be safe. Freeze, no way, I'll connect and hide to be safe. Fawn is merge to connect and grovel to be safe. So very people pleaser mentality when it comes to that, and we have a lot of that. We have some of that in us somewhere at one point or another. I believe we all people pleased in some way. So depending on your 4F type, you may gravitate either to the inner critic or the outer critic. It depends on the ratio, and it depends on what type of 4F you are, and I'm sure you can be a combination of all of them or a culmination of all of them, same difference. So freeze and fight types are often polarized to the outer critic. Fawn types tend to be dominated by the inner critic, and flight types can have the most variance in inner and outer critic ratio. And your subtype can also have a big influence on that. The freeze type can judgmentally denounce the entire outside world to justify her all or none belief that people are dangerous. The flight type can use his own perfectionist striving to excel so that his outer critic can judge everyone else as inferior. The fawn type uses inner critic self-hate to self-censor and avoid the fear of being authentic and vulnerable in relationship. The fight type, in a paradoxical twist, controls others through the outer critic to prevent them from abandoning him, while at the same time using prickliness to not let them get too close. Fight types can also leave at the first sign that the other cannot be controlled. Sighs. I have a particular person in mind when it comes to that, and things like that are tricky, right? Because again, it is your paradigm, your chosen, well, not really chosen, your handed down paradigm of who you are meant to be and who you are said to be and who you are told you are, things like that. So it takes a lot of deprogramming and reprogramming to undo the shoestring of these things, if you will. Perfectionism in the hands of the outer critic can be paranoia, worthlessness, like it just paranoically picayune. Picayune, what an ugly ass word. Perfectionism in itself, again, is not attainable, and growing up with a perfectionist mother is not, that's honestly, I feel like I don't know which one's worse, growing up with a perfectionist mother or father. And I feel like I grew up with pretty much both of them were perfectionists, like working off of each other. And nothing was really ever good enough. It's just a lot of like, show me better, do better, be different, things of that nature. So, and a large part of that has to do with trusting yourself and not being able to trust yourself. So in turn, obviously, you're not going to trust the people around you, specifically and namely your kids in that scenario. You're always going to think they're not telling the truth. You're always going to think that they're doing something. But again, that comes from an inner and outer misunderstanding that you do not internally trust yourself and to make the right decisions. So that's how I feel about flight types, honestly. They don't trust themselves to make the right decisions, so that when something good comes along or something they have to pick perfectionist pick at things and try to figure out what's actually wrong with what the good they're experiencing is happening in their life. And that just sounds like I got sleepy thinking of that. That just sounds exhausting, to be honest. I was also thinking of this earlier, right? Like our duty and our responsibility to take responsibility and accountability for the things we say, do, think, act, etc., etc. All the things. Because we can easily point our fingers all the way around the room. But unless we're pointing it back at ourselves at some point, it's going to be very difficult to dig up whatever it is that you're trying to uncover and heal. So, I mean, accountability and self-awareness very much go hand in hand. So being passive-aggressive and the outer critic, just listen up. So this says children are initially wired to respond angrily to parental abuse or neglect outside of the fight types. Most traumatized children learn early that protesting parental unfairness is an unpardonable offense. They are generally forced to repress their protests and complaints. This then renders their angry silent and subliminal. This anger, however, does not disappear. It percolates as an ever-accumulating sea of resentment that can fuel the outer critic's obsession for finding fault and seeing danger in everyone. Viewing all relationships through the lens of parental abandonment, the outer critic never lets its guard down. It continuously transfers unexpressed childhood anger onto others and silently scapegoats them by blowing current disappointments out of proportion. Citing insignificant transgressions as justification, the survivor flashes back into outer critic mode and silently fumes and grumbles in long judgmental ruminations. To bastardize Elizabeth Barrett Browning, how do I find thee lacking? Let me count the ways. When silently blaming the wrong person becomes habitual, it manifests as passive aggressiveness. Common examples of passive aggression are distancing yourself in hurt withdrawal or pushing others away with backhanded compliments. Other examples include poor listening, hurtful teasing disguised as joking, and the withholding of positive feedback and appreciation. Chronic lateness and poor follow-through on commitments can also be unconscious passive-aggressive ways of expressing anger to others. I'm guilty of this. I absolutely am guilty of this, you know. So being passive-aggressive, I feel like, also stems somewhat kind from being a people pleaser, right? Because you're doing something, you don't want to do it, so you do something passive-aggressively to make sure that person knows how unhappy you are with the decision that you feel they made for you, when really, who's in control of your decisions? You. Y-O-U. Yeah. And I sympathize and empathize with not being able to protest when I felt I was being treated unfairly or my needs weren't being met. Having my guard up with my outer critic and trying to float through this sea of resentment, if you will. And resentment is not a fun place to be, right? Because it can be a very lonely place to be. It can be a very confusing place to be. Resentment is not a fun emotion. I'm sure you feel it for certain people if you haven't spoken on things, or if you just hold in anger. Like, holding in anger and feelings are like the number one ways to harbor resentment. And I don't have the patience for that. I don't have the bandwidth, if you will, to hold that in my heart and around me. And the definition of resentment is bitter indignation at having been treated unfairly. Bitter indignation at having been treated unfairly. Bitter indignation? That's a $5 word if I do say so myself. Not being able to cultivate an atmosphere of being open and being able to hear things without reacting towards it based off of your perspective and your emotions is very large scale thinking. Because, if you don't create that environment for your children, or as you go on in life, and then you take accountability for what you're just, now then you're going to be blaming yourself for things that really aren't your fault in essence, right? I will say that when I said I was guilty of being passive aggressive, specifically what I'm talking about is distancing yourself and hurt withdrawal. I'm guilty of that because, when I was younger, speaking on my emotions was kind of frowned upon and not really accepted. So now when I retreat because of being or hurt withdrawal, when I retreat for hurt withdrawal, it's because I guess I feel my emotions and what I feel about the situation doesn't really matter. So I pull away, I withdraw, I remove myself from the situation, right? I had a really bad falling out with one of my best friends of 16, 17 years. And, I know that a lot of it stems from that, or some of it stems from that. Some of it stems obviously from childhood, but a lot of it stems from that because, I did speak on something that I had feelings and emotions about. Now, whether it was new or old feelings, it doesn't really matter. I spoke on it, and the end result was us not really being friends anymore and not carrying on our friendship. Now, obviously, perspective is a three-way street, and, I never really got a chance to sit down and talk with her about it, but, here I am. When it comes to speaking my mind about things or being hurt about certain situations and stuff like that, when it comes to certain friends, it's like I don't bother to speak on it anymore. I just let it go. I don't talk to them. I just keep it moving. And maybe that's not fair to them. Maybe that's not a way to have relationships or whatever, what have you. But I don't know. I guess there's no really real rationalizing that, because it's happened to a couple of different friends, few different friends over the past year or so, that I just kind of just distanced myself from, and I was like, all right, I'm good. I'm good off this, and even my siblings, there's shit. I'm just like, okay, it's enough, like I don't need this in my life. I'm good. Thank you so much. But also you got to differentiate, right? Like you got to differentiate between what is worth speaking about and what is no longer worth mentioning. Because in between, I feel lies resentment somewhere, right? Like the more things happen with a certain friend and things come up, you don't ever end up speaking on it. You just kind of keep sweeping under the rug, and you don't say anything. You don't do anything. You just let it go. Then eventually, it's going to be weird vibes. It's going to be weird vibes. When I've experienced this, I found myself getting more annoyed with the person as we talked. Little things. And it does suck. It does suck when you get into that situation. Because again, like if you feel your feelings and your thoughts didn't really matter at any point in your life, then you're just not going to speak on it. And it's going to be a lonely ass, it's going to be a lonely ass existence. So this, I wanted to focus on like silencing the mind in your life, because refusing to give a voice to the critic's point of view is going to be essential into healing this part of you. So the outer critic is the author of its intimacy spoiling program, Being Honest to a Fault. In the guise of honesty, the outer critic can negatively notice only what is imperfect in another. Under the spell of perfectionism, the outer critic can tear the other apart by laundry listing his normal weaknesses and foibles. When challenged about this, many fight types will respond that I was just trying to be honest. The inner critic has its own version of excessive honesty, which I sometimes call beating you to the punch, afraid of being criticized, as in childhood. The inner critic can launch the survivor into a confession of her every defect in hopes of short-circuiting anyone else from bringing them up. Sometimes hearing the criticism from yourself feels less hurtful than hearing it from someone else. After all, it's old news to you and your critic. I subscribe to authenticity as one of my highest values, but it does not include sharing my outer critic's view of you or exposing my inner critic's unfair judgments of me. As stated earlier, the toxic critic is not an authentic part of us. We were not born with it. We were indoctrinated with it by parents who viewed us in an extremely negative and jaundiced way. Because of this, we need to protect our intimates from this distorted and destructive judgments. Just as importantly, we need to protect ourselves from alienating people by presenting ourselves as if we are so defective that we do not deserve to be loved. And I feel that withdrawal that I was speaking to, that has a large part to do with that. We feel we don't deserve to be loved, so we don't speak our mind or anything like that. And I constantly remind myself, geez, those who matter don't mind, and those who mind don't matter. And I feel that statement has some truth to it still, no matter how it ages. But sometimes people who matter mind a little bit, but that's because they haven't stopped to think about it from a different perspective, or they have their own opinion on it, or they have their own experience with whatever you're talking about. So they go ahead and just throw their opinions out there, whatever. And that's okay, right? We can give them at least that much grace. So how can we reduce our outer critic, and how can we reduce our critics in general? Reducing outer critic reactivity requires a great deal of mindfulness. This is essential for fight types who act out aggressively, as it is for those trauma types who internally rant against the entire human group known as fucking people. It is also of great importance for any survivor who is locked into alienation because of judgmentalness of his outer critic. Mindfulness, once again, intricately aware of everything that is going on inside us, especially thoughts, images, feelings, and sensations. In terms of outer critic work, it is essential that we become more mindful of both the cognitive and emotional content of our thoughts. This is the same as the inner critic work, where the two key fronts of critic shrinking are cognitive and emotional. Cognitive work in both cases involves the demolition and rebuilding processes of thought stopping and thought substitution, respectively. And emotional work in both instances is grief work. It is removing the critic's fuel supply and unexpressed childhood anger and the uncried tears of a lifetime of abandonment. When we truly want to take an honest look at our inner and outer critic, the more we in early recovery, the outer critic seems to become nastier and stronger the more we challenge it. And it may seem or feel counterproductively, like it's counterproductively stirring it up or making it worse by daring to resist it. But when mindfulness of the critic seems to strengthen it, we are typically flashing back to how our parents rebuked our early protests at their attacks. This is often impossible to remember because our dysfunctional parents typically kill our protest function before our memory function comes online. Nonetheless, fear of parental reprisal is often the unconscious dynamic that scares us out of challenging our own toxic thinking. This is why survivors in early recovery often need to invoke the instinct of angry self-protection to empower their thought stopping. So, and again, so when I'm bringing that back to like resentment and everything like that, because holding in those emotions, they got to go somewhere. And when I was a teenager, I didn't know what to do with those emotions and those feelings and all that anger I had built up inside of me. So I would react in poor ways. There was a lot going on with my family at the time. It was a lot going on in my personal life. It just was a lot. Life was a lot. Life was lifing at the time. So I would get angry. I would have outbursts. I was told I had a temper problem, that I had anger issues, that I was bipolar, all of these things that people were telling me, and mainly people around me, my family, etc. So, I used to break things. I broke a cabinet, I broke a window, broke a door. I would punch shit, break my hand, just stuff like that. And, when breaking things didn't feel satisfying enough, I would just drink or do something stupid, or I don't know, nothing that was productive in any way, shape, or form, though. I can tell you that. So until I started to understand that those things that I was doing was not the solution, or only going to provide me with an instant gratification relief of what I was actually feeling internally and way, way deep down in my subconscious and my psyche, I was drowning. I was drowning in it. I was drowning in my own bullshit. Sea of resentment, as the book said earlier. So, thought stopping is the great way to practice thought stopping and just completely making your life still is obviously meditation. Meditation is the recognition of thoughts and the acceptance and acknowledgement of those thoughts, but we do not become those thoughts. We do not ruminate on those thoughts. And that's not by dictionary definition. That's my own personal definition, okay? Off the top of the dome. You feel me? Yeah, it's thought stopping is a very important thing to have, but it comes hand in hand with mindfulness and being self-aware. You have these tools that you can use to and I'm not saying it's an easy task. Like that's not what I'm saying at all. Maybe that's just my inner critic telling me, you think it's easy. No, bitch, I don't think it's easy. That shit is hard. It's difficult. But it's work, right? Like you got to do the work. You need to do the work in order to become the version of you claim you want to be, right? Not just these internet spiritual healers that they got out there. Now these people tweeting shit online that they don't actually believe in real life. It's like, come on, bro. It's hard to decipher. It can be hard to decipher, but use your intuition. I promise it won't lead you astray if you're listening. So I wanted to end this off on giving some tools that you could use to assist you in healing your inner and outer critic mind. Obviously, mindfulness and meditation, positive affirmations and subliminal affirmations definitely played a big role in my belief system and who I've become, because we are the ancestors now. We are now the ancestors. So we are the kapuna of the world. So how do you want to speak to people? How do you want to speak to others? What do you want to bring to life for other people? Are you going to bring to life the negative traits that they probably already beat themselves up about? Or are you going to bring to light the positivity and the divinity within these people that you're around and that you're teaching, whether or not you know it to be true or not? Whenever you're saying something and whatever you decide to focus on, good or bad, this is what you're planting in people's heads. Your words are like spells, but they're also like little seeds of plants. You're planting in people's heads. You're planting in people's head. I told my PT today, she was like, oh, it's my first Mother's Day this year. Someone better get me flowers, yada, yada, yada. So I was laying there and then I was doing my stretches and I looked at her and I was like, hey, when they tell people treat others how you want to be treated, they were talking about yourself too. I was like, so what are you doing for yourself on Mother's Day? She's like, oh, I haven't really thought about it like that. I'm like, yeah. So what are you going to do? What do you want to do? She's like, oh, I might dress up, go get my nails done, get some flowers, weed, whatever. I'm like, good for you, man. Like, do that. Like, you can't sit here and expect and wait on other people to be doing these things for you. And if you don't do those things for yourself, fulfill yourself, which is ultimately what I'm getting at, is you fulfill yourself first. Fulfill yourself first. Fill your cup up first. And then it'll overflow. And then that way you won't ever have to feel empty or like you need someone else to fulfill you or to fill up your cup for you. Because in reality, you're going to be waiting a mighty long time for that. Really, truly. Like people out here struggle to fill their own cup. So how are they going to be able to see that's how you want to be treated if you're not treating yourself that way? right? Again, that's why I go back to buying myself flowers or dressing up when I feel like it or dressing up for myself, you know? People be like, "Oh, where are you going? You look so nice." I'm like, "Oh, I was just going to get a coffee." You know what I mean? It happened to me the other day at the coffee shop. "Whoa, what's your outfit? Where you going?" I was like, here to run errands." You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I'll run an errand in a nightgown. Not a nightgown, you know what I'm saying? A ball gown, you know? It's just what makes you happy? Like what makes you feel like the best you? What makes you feel beautiful, handsome, whatever? You know? These are little tiny things that you can do to build your confidence and to fulfill yourself in certain ways that other people doing it just wouldn't be as satisfying. Truly. At that point you're just reaching. Also, journaling and self-compassion practices. Like I just said, you know, treat yourself how you want to be treated. Like, treat people how you want to be treated. Treat yourself how you want to be treated. You know what I mean? If other people, again, if other people can't see that and see how you get treated and see how you treat yourself, how do they know how to treat you? You know? And now, I'm not saying people treating you poorly is a reflection of how you're treating yourself. Sometimes it is, but sometimes hurt people hurt people. So a lot of cliches in here, a lot of quotes, etc., etc. And your inner child work. Connect with your inner child and address any unresolved emotional wounds from your past. Offer your inner child the love and support they need to heal. Hear or heal. Same shit. Obviously, you could get therapy or counseling. I'm not really big on either of those. You know, I'm not saying it wouldn't be necessary for certain situations, but that's not my preferred method of healing. I'm a true proponent of we are healers on our own and we can heal the things that we truly wish to heal. Now, I'm not saying an outside perspective would not be helpful or assisting in any way, because obviously an outside perspective of how your brain works and what goes on in your mind would be helpful to hear from somebody else, not just people around you. Because people around you, they might just be pacifying you a little bit. All right? And creative expression is a big one. Physical exercise and gratitude. Gratitude is very, very high up there for me, because you gotta be great. You don't gotta do anything, but being grateful will literally make you feel as fulfilled as just being a giving heart, doing things that are giving, to be grateful to whatever you're giving to, with no expectation of getting something back or anything like that. And also limit negative influences, for the love of God. Surround yourself with positive influences and limit exposure to people or media that fuel your inner critic. So I had to really stop and think about this the other day, because I was talking to my cousin. I love her dearly. I really do. But, you know, sometimes we pick up things from our parents without consciously realizing it. It's in our psyche, it's in our subconscious, but that's because it's what we've been surrounded by so long, you know? And I had to stop and think, because, you know, whenever I get on the phone with her, somehow, some way, something, it always ends up back on my parents and what happened when I was, but I'm not a victim. I'm not a victim. Yo, I am literally the creator of my circumstance. I'm not a victim. I'm a victor. Okay. So I got off the phone with her the other day and I was just like, whoa, you know, like, why does it always come back to like what happened to me she knows what happened to me as a kid. Like, maybe not all of it. You know, I guess she's just, as a mother, she's appalled of what happened and how someone could do whatever they did. But, you know, I'm not a victim in that. I'm not in that scenario anymore. That's not my life. That's not my story. It's a part of my story, but it's not my story. It's not a part of my journey right now. It's a part of my journey in the sense that I'm willing and able and open to talk about it, because I don't hold any ill will or malice for either one of my parents. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, you really have to stop and reflect when you're talking to certain people, specifically family, when they want to bring up other shit. They want to bring up old stuff. They want to ruminate on things of the past that, they can't make sense of. I still can't make sense of it, and they're my parents. Like it doesn't make sense to me, but they had their reasons. I'm sure they did. And whatever those reasons may be, whether I understand them or not, they're still valid. And it doesn't matter left, right, up, or down. Like it does not matter. It matters right now who I choose to be and who I am and what I choose to discuss. So, the next time I'm being very intentional about it. The next time I speak to her or her mom or anything like that, my aunties, I'm going to be very intentional about not bothering to respond or anything like that when they bring up my parents or anything they want to hear about it, because you've heard it before. There's nothing else to hear. There's nothing new under the sun. Nothing else to hear. Okay? Anyway, thanks for joining my little tangent. But yeah, I hope in some way this information was useful to you, or that you can utilize it in some way, or that you at least just enjoyed the conversation of me talking to myself and yelling at my dog. But yeah, I'll do my best to be intentional about not making the next episode be so far in between and be a little bit more prepared for that one. As always, I appreciate y'all for joining me. I'll talk to you soon. Have a blessed one. Peace.